In the 41st millennium, it is said there is only war, but this is not always the case, and the Iyo sector has at various times been an example of this. Its relative peace as a whole over the millennia has allowed for some interesting and rather unique cultures and worlds. Known now as one of the great powerhouses of the Iyo sector, Chariot in many ways is seen to operate in a way that is contradictory to the imperial dogmatism typical of many other worlds, yet all the while being one of its greatest assets. A world that in many respects would seem to be the antithesis of what the imperial regime would allow or want, yet rose to become one of the strongest pillars in the region. A world that has gone out of its way to prove that spectacle can be just as valuable a resource to a tyrannical regime as manufacturing. A world where sports and entertainment define culture. A place where champions rise, legends are forged, and by the will of the God Emperor of mankind, devotion is made manifest through violence. But the truth is much darker, for on this world of entertainment, control is everything, and the show must always go on. Hello everyone, my name is Kirk and welcome back to my little corner of the 41st millennium in my homebrew Sector of Iyo. As today we're going to be going off topic a little bit from the usual regiments, war bands and wars now enveloping my homebrew sector to talk about sports entertainment. That's right, 40k wrestling. This is going to be a video full of pictures and kit bash minis and a kit bash ring too, so I do hope it was all worth it and worth the wait for you guys. I wanted to do something special for the year 1 anniversary and I've never seen this done before, so I thought it'd be fun. Obviously it's a bit of a niche topic, but when I started this channel in the sector just over a year ago now, I thought it'd be fun to try and blend 40k and wrestling together and have a world that's dedicated to sports entertainment and wrestling, done in a believable way. I get this video might not be for everyone, but hey, I think it's cool, and I think wrestling is cool and stupid and over the top and amazing and all that stuff, and 40k is exactly the same, so I thought they'd blend well. Plus, on the back of WrestleMania 42 and the hype for the new edition of 40k coming up soon, what better time to do it? It's all just for fun in the end, and it's fan fiction anyway, so who cares? If you're only interested in the ring and the kit bash minis and stuff, then skip forward to about the 9-minute mark. If you want to hear about Chariot and its history and how Dominatus started as a sport, then keep watching. I hope you enjoy it though, and please do hit that like button. Subscribe if you find yourself coming back to these videos, as it really would help out the channel as we head for 100 subscribers. Thank you very much for watching. Let's get into the lore. Before it bore any name recognised by imperial record, this world was designated as an unclassified mining world utilised by the Imperium as a quick resource node in the construction of the rising hive cities and the expansion of the sector capital, Sindramundi. Its population made up of grizzled labourers, guildsmen and indentured workers drawn in from nearby sectors. Infrastructure, hab blocks and void docks would be raised, supplies would be drawn in to sustain the populace. Yet as time went by, resources proved to be more scarce than expected, and the world's infrastructure had expanded far beyond its use. Guilds moved on in search of new resources, populations resettled, and seemingly so had any sort of governance. The planet and its remaining populace were all but left to their own devices. What were once monstrous industrial zones and towering hab-blocked cities stood abandoned, the populace slowly resorting to harbouring criminal activity in order to sustain themselves, setting themselves as neutral ground for any who would come trade, a safe zone if you will. Gangs of outlaws would begin to take residence, but as the world became more piratic and became more of a criminal hub, feuds would still remain, violence would often break out, and the populace had little physical way of actually controlling it. What they would do is to begin hosting competitions and sporting events and encourage the gangs to engage in them in order to prove themselves. Not only did this work, but it brought a beginning of a new culture. Hosting underground fighting pits, contact sports, racing, gambling, all would become a way of life. Criminal syndicates would take over, and along with this culture of sport and competition, would begin to forge vast empires of illegal activity, extortion, match fixing, racketeering, even involving the planetary governor. And over time, legitimate traders would begin to settle, providing more credit flow. The world was becoming a pirate's haven. With growing conflicts both near and far, a world of such open criminality so close to the sector's capital simply could not be. Something had to be done, and when the capital could spare resources and time, it was. What was unusual was what they did. What happened was not the expected crackdown. To the people of the world, in fact, it would seem quite the opposite. Nothing would happen at all. Business would continue as usual. If anything, in these years, for many, things would vastly improve. Over time, infrastructure would grow, funding would increase, mining facilities would be transformed into the first arenas, great void ship platforms would be turned into city foundations, and streets once deserted were now bustling with activity. Traders, preachers, crime lords, aristocrats, all mixing and gambling with the common folk. Sports would seem safer, with regulated gear and equipment. Gangs would seemingly be replaced or morph into legitimate guilds. Business as usual would no longer seem like something in the shadows. Imperial nobility would seem be attending races or watching bouts of action in the pits. In fact, quite when things changed is not known, only that from then on, with the nearby world of Miranda becoming the propaganda machine it was, and Emblem providing the masses of parchment and paper to write on, this world would forevermore give them something to write about. Corporate and ecclesiastical consolidation began as the Adeptus Ministorum seemingly recognised a fundamental truth in this world, that through entertainment, belief can be directed, and if belief can be directed, it can be weaponised. The official directive stated, aim to stabilise sector morale, redirect civilian unrest into controlled entertainment, provide R&R infrastructure for military rotation, and generate economic surplus through pilgrimage tourism. Informally, it was described by planners as a vehicle for moral projection, and later, a chariot of unity, and then a chariot carrying the sector forward. The name remained. The transformation of the world was total, and entire regions were repurposed. It was to be a managed environment designed not to produce weapons of faith, but to control and regulate emotion. Soon, broadcast cathedral networks had been set up, and once huge industrial sectors had been turned into entertainment districts. Hab-block spires rose taller with every passing year, lit with the traditional neon lights of its piratic past. But rather than allowing multiple competing businesses to continue independently, these were largely consolidated into a single unified institution, under the authority of a newly founded order of the Ministorum, the Ordo Ludorum, Bellatorum, Imperantium, or the OLBI, the Order of Games and Ruling Warriors, an ecclesiarchic branch dedicated to the oversight and management of sports and entertainment, specifically in regards to controlled belief, and with the power to legitimize or condemn any form of either. This organisation was tasked not merely with the administration of events, but with the construction of a coherent ideological framework within each respective sport. Though its effectiveness would overall vary from sport to sport, the idea was the same: to maintain imperial control and interests and uphold imperial doctrine. Whilst the planet would never fully break free of its criminal underbelly, and many underground and illegal events would forever continue, the Ordo Ludorum, Bellatorum, Imperantium would forevermore provide sanctioned sports and entertainment, regulated and overseen directly by the Ministorum. However, one sport would seemingly begin to explode in popularity around this time. Based in some form of Terran martial art popular in the second millennium, it would stand above all others in capturing the masses' attention, a spectacle known as Dominatus. Dominatus is many things. It is a sport, it's theatre, it's action, drama and comedy. It is worship and propaganda, all rolled up into one easily digestible package, broadcasted across continents, across worlds, across the sector itself, and until recently had begun broadcasting to areas of the wider Imperium. Dominatus was therefore not only entertainment, but a system, designed to maximise imperial beliefs, master the sport to evoke the emotion of contested combat, whilst reducing more extreme forms of violent competition that often fought corruption. Its participants are known as exemplars, and are not so much competitors, but highly trained athletes and actors, designed to be symbols of imperial glory and culture. Storylines and match outcomes are not the result of chance or skill, though it may appear so, but carefully scripted and determined well in advance to reinforce specific imperial narratives, values, and support for campaigns and regime projects, or in reaction to public support, social achievements or failures, and production quotas, and plenty more factors. Yet at its core, Dominatus operates on a fundamental contradiction. While all the outcomes are predetermined, the illusion of genuine competition must be maintained at all costs. This is not only simply a matter of audience engagement, but of ideological necessity. Within the sport of Dominatus, the Imperium cannot be shown to fail or look weak in any meaningful, prolonged, or systemic way. They are the heroes of their own narrative, after all. Yet the events depicted in the arena are presented not as fictional constructs, but as manifestations of imperial truth. Victories are interpreted as evidence of righteousness, discipline, honour and faith, while defeats are framed in such a way as to avoid undermining the authority or legitimacy of the Imperium itself. At the same time, they must acknowledge certain social truths and display some sort of class or civil struggle between exemplars in order to maintain legitimacy of competition and its realism, be as they may twisted distortions, without causing genuine friction between these groups. And though at times it has had its exceptions, until recently, this has been seen as rather successful, with social engagement and interest in the sport of Dominatus becoming more popular year upon year. Exemplars, while they are indeed performers, their primary role is not to express individuality, although to some degree that is inevitable and necessary, but to embody specific archetypes that reflect key aspects of imperial society. Not only taught to entertain, but to instruct, to connect with the public and raise public piety, righteousness, and the loyalty of one's group to the Imperium and the God Emperor over the other, that other being another social group. To show that we the miners are far more loyal than those priests are pious, that we the soldiers are the ones who know true sacrifice, that we the hiveborn are more industrious than those nobles, etc., etc. These archetypes can be as niche or diverse as needed, with each of these roles being carefully constructed and maintained, with visual design, behaviour, and narrative arcs all building a consistent and recognisable identity, with flamboyant or modest attire depending on the character's background, history, archetype and other factors, often to gain attention and pull eyes in, not always making their archetype easy to identify at first glance. This is because time has led to more visual extremity of the exemplars themselves, and each new development seeking to surpass what came before. However, it has all been a very slow phase, and is always under the monitoring of the order above. Importantly, these identities are not tied to any single individual. When a performer is no longer able to fulfill their role, whether due to injury, death, corruption, or administrative decision, they can be replaced, and often are. There is typically only one of each archetype per circuit, however, they can be as unique as needed and even cross over archetypal roles with another similar archetype. This keeps rosters tight and easily digestible. However, if an exemplar is aging out, a common theme is to have a young talent assume the same role and vie to replace the older exemplar, breathing new life into a role and replacing him through the storyline, as a method to gather public support from a younger generation. Practice reinforces the idea that it is the role, rather than the individual, that holds significance, that anyone could step into the same archetype's shoes. The archetype endures, even if those who portray it are discarded or replaced. To build narratives, Dominatus splits its exemplars into three categories: faces, heels, and enemies, otherwise known as the faithful, the false, and the hostile. But these are less dependent on being a morally good person, and more a display of imperial loyalty and obedience, often determined by public work quotas, enlistment levels, social status, public support, and depending on who and where the exemplar is representing. Faces are the heroes, called the faithful or the pious. They are hardworking, the strong, and those who show loyalty and honour for the emperor. They can beat each other and others through simply showing more piety than another, opportunity through real injury, or perceived experience, skill level, or legendary status. Either way, they must be true and honourable to the Imperium, and display loyalty to the Imperial agenda being pushed at all times. Heels are called the false or the falsi. They are morally grey characters who work within the system. To one social group they may be a face, to another a heel. They may cheat or question narratives, they may show some form of moral flaw, doubters, authority figures out of control, people facing penitence. They can be seen as lazy or unconventional, they can bend the rules to their advantage, but must make the system work for them from within the system. True heels, or enemies, are termed the hostiles, and are portrayed as the renegade, the unsanctioned, the non-believer, the lawless. Even psykers and xenos. However, certain subjects, most notably chaos, and any mention of the chaos gods, real internal corruption, civil wars, or the true fallibility of the imperial institutions, are entirely excluded from representation, though are often hinted at or shown in subtle nods and inside jokes for those in the know. Overall, the result is a narratively driven system in which all possible outcomes reinforce the same underlying message. The Imperium is and must always be victorious in the end. Referees are known as adjudicators and are the key part of the act's performance. They are a voice to the production team and to some degree an on-hand director and manager of the match, with a responsibility of aiding the combatants in telling the narrative, timekeeping, providing safety, and communication between each other. They are extremely prestigious and highly sought after roles of authority. In the narrative, they represent imperial law and are there to adjudicate and call the bout or engagement, giving them their name. They are also there to maintain the order and integrity of the rules of Dominatus. The Adjudicator Primus is the head referee and often oversees the main event. However, within the sport, it is often necessary to have two or more other adjudicators placed off to one side, armed with shock batons or grapple poles in order to restrain competitors if or when things get out of control. And they often do. Yet a key aspect of Dominatus is the portrayal of external threats, most notably Xenos. However, these portrayals are not intended to be accurate, but rather to serve the needs of the Imperium at large. Xenos species such as Orcs and Eldari, Tau and Votan are depicted using human or abhuman performers in elaborate but often very crude costumes, with their characteristics exaggerated or simplified to emphasize particular traits drawn from Imperial propaganda. Orcs, for example, are most commonly represented and portrayed as small and rather weak, loud, crude and inherently foolish, but dangerous in a group. Despite this parody, the Imperium still finds it rather difficult to out-stupid real orcs in their depiction of them, but are often performed by disposable and often malnourished criminals who are looking for penitence, put into bright primary colours with a crude mask and then simply painted green. They are often run in tag teams or stable groups to be squashed when needed. However, it has not been unheard of for particular talent to specialise in this form of character, becoming a reoccurring character and growing threat to one day be put down. Alongside this, Tau are often simply emaciated skinny people painted blue, most known for their cowardice, grovelling at the greatness of the Imperium, and rank pacifism. The Votan, however, are typically shown to be fat, lazy, greedy drunkards, difficult to understand, and often showing a quirky, if slightly scientific buffoonery, often played by large ratlings, and both being used for comic relief alongside their orc counterparts. Eldari, on the other hand, are typically depicted as quick, deceptive, sneaky, lithe, and overly theatrical, sometimes displaying psycho powers. They often intervene in important storylines, or sow disorder, requiring adjudicators to run in and try and stop them before they can escape, all in the storyline of course. But they are often humans placed into dark bodysuits and in full-faced masks or helmets with exaggerated pointy ears. This is done because despite being played by a human, the idea of depicting a Xenos species as looking human is all too much for the OLBI. All Xenos depictions are used for different narrative purposes, with the Eldari arguably being respected more, but they are only ever depicted as hostile. Yet certain species, particularly those that are considered too alien or difficult to represent, such as Tyranids or Necrons, are excluded entirely from the performances. This selective representation ensures that all enemies depicted within Dominatus are both recognisable, understandable, and narratively manageable. Psykers and psyker powers in the sport of Dominatus are treated as unsanctioned. That is not to say they aren't used, but what the audience sees is not true psyker powers, but instead an illusion and part of the narrative when it occurs. Always by a heel, and it is always used to cheat or cause trouble, and portrayed as unpredictable, unstable, for the weak-willed, and always condemned as dishonourable. And just like with the arrival of the Eldari, once again leading to adjudicars, trying to suppress their user. Yet in major storylines, acts of faith, however, can be used, but still, none of this is real. Behind the scenes, however, word spreads that true psyker powers are being used to influence the masses in subtle ways. When it comes to matches, exemplars are really trying to tell a story, not to truly kill each other, though it may appear so, and are seen to be striving for the glory not in the eyes of the people, though it is often what matters, but in the eyes of the Emperor himself, and are seen to be performing as much for him as they do for those actually in attendance or viewing through broadcasts or reading about it later. Dominatus matches are known as bouts, with premium fights being termed engagements, battles, and wars depending on their intensity of rivalry or number of competitors. Matches are ended by pinfall or submission or knockout, with a pinfall being a 2 count known as a double tap. Match types can, however, vary greatly, and they include, but not limited to, regular 1 fall, tag, stable, last man standing, cage, cell, hardcore, elimination, rumbles, and many more, each designed to convey specific themes or lessons. These range from hierarchical contests such as the Ascendant Pyramid, to the Crucible, and many more. However, there exists an element within it that deviate from this. Most notable among these are the so-called punishment matches, or tidal bouts, in which individuals who are not traditional performers are placed within the arena. These individuals may include criminals, petty heretics, political dissidents, or other people deemed expendable. They are often costumed as enemies of the Imperium, such as orcs, or in generic rags. They are starved, malnourished, drugged, or in some form of disadvantage. Though often in groups, they are subjected to overwhelming force by established exemplars. Unlike standard matches, these encounters may involve significantly reduced levels of choreography and safety, resulting in genuine injury or death. While such outcomes are not explicitly acknowledged, they are not entirely concealed, and serve to reinforce the perceived stakes and seriousness of the spectacle. While the rules and structures of these matches may vary, they all serve the same fundamental purpose: to reinforce the values and narratives deemed important by the Imperium. Through repetition and variation, these messages are embedded within the audience's understanding both of the spectacle and the wider world. Despite its scripted nature, and whilst in reality an exemplar's job is to protect his opponent, Dominatus involves a significant degree of physical risk. Injuries are not only common, but when they do, they are often incorporated into ongoing narratives of the performers involved. When a popular or strategically valuable exemplar is injured, efforts are made to restore them back to functionality, frequently through the use of cybernetic augmentation if it can't heal naturally. These modifications may be presented within the narrative as divine blessings, marks of resilience, or symbols of sacrifice, thereby enhancing the performer's status rather than diminishing it. In other cases, augmentations may be purely cosmetic or entirely fictional, designed to support a particular character's concept without providing any real functional benefit. The distinction between genuine and artificial enhancements is not always intended to be clear to the audience. Divisions are split between sex, men's and women's, with all of the titles doubled over to represent both. However, notably, the Mechanicus division was brought in a number of times and failed to gain traction with fans and potential talent, due to the overlap with Servitor and Mechanicus combat arenas, and a lack of interest in the flesh-based theatrics by followers of the Omnissiah. Currently, the division does not exist. And whilst all being based on Chariot, exemplars are divided across 5 different circuits or brands, representing and referred to by segmentum, with all 5 segmentums having their own men's and women's divisions, identity, colour scheming and logos, internal archetypes, storylines, narratives and conflicts, with junior, lower and mid-card titles referred to as merits, motifs and mantles, and talent ultimately vying for the respective top championship referred to as a grand mantle, these being the Tempestus, Obscurus, Pacificus, Ultima and Solar Grand Mantles, with title holders themselves being referred to plurally as the title itself. True or not, Grand Mantle titles and above are said to contain a tiny fragment of the Emperor's power armour, much like the Crux Terminatus, and are seen with just as much reverence. Current woman's Segmentum Ultima Dominatus Grand Mantle is the ex-sororita sister, the Blazing Shayna, who after paying her dues in war, turned exemplar and wowed the crowd with her devastating submission moves. Her male counterpart, Hivespire Joel, is the super heavyweight everyman who rose to glory through the Hive, fighting for the honour of his community, then his city, and now he fights for the honour and glory of the Hivers across the Segmentum. Other titles that are featured in each Segmentum include the Twin Eagle merits, motifs and mantles for each tag teams, as well as the Imperialis cohort laurels for stable groups, representing the strength of the collective. There are also other notable titles and awards that are either shared or give an exemplar a chance at glory through tournaments and stipulations, including the Crucible Brand, Writ of the Saint, the Emperor's Gift, and the Ascendancy Cup. Other symbols, such as marks, can also be given out as a punishment for the archetype's representative group failing to hit targets, for public disturbances, embarrassment, or corruption, or for any form of other punishment or civil unrest large enough to warrant the masses' attention, especially if the exemplar represents a world that is under any sort of punishment itself. Yet umbrellaing these are other major titles that hold recognition across multiple circuits and brands, and are the representatives of the organisations of the sport as a whole, including the Imperial Double Eagle Aquila Grand Mantles, where both members of the tag team hold one half of the Aquila each. Together they are symbolically united. It is the top belt for a tag team and is defended across multiple Segmentum. Then come the big two, the Intersegmentum Imperialis Dominatus Grand Mantle, and the undisputed Universal Imperator Dominatus Maxima. The former is known to be the Workhorse Championship, and is said to, amongst other jewels and artistry, contain as much of the Emperor's armour in its design as the Crux Terminatus of an entire Terminator squad. Its wealth is monumental, and it is the realistic ultimate price for exemplars rising through the ranks. It is used to unify narratives and story arcs across different Segmentum brands, and to be the working face of the industry, featured in the main events of most premium shows. The title holder must not only be a uniquely disciplined individual, but unquestionably loyal to the Imperium, a phenomenal athlete, actor, and in many ways the ultimate tool of propaganda the OLBI can deliver. Although they have not always been represented by the most morally good of characters, many of the best have in fact been heels or false, ready to be overcome by the next great exemplar faithful. And in the case of the current Intersegmentum Imperialis Dominatus Grand Mantle, someone who has controversially toppled a beloved hero. It is also a safe title to change hands and be contested over, leaving the ultimate prize in an almost mythic status, that being the OLBI Undisputed Universal Imperator Dominatus Maxima. Like all of these titles, this is not just a championship, but a symbolic extension of imperial iconography and authority itself. However, this title is so prestigious it has almost become a legend in itself. Though there is no way of verifying this, it is said to contain as much of the Emperor's armour as would equal the Crux Terminatus of an entire chapter's Terminator elite at full strength. Its wealth incalculable. On top of everything else that has come before, the holder is presented as possessing the ultimate award of humanity's greatness and being one of the most prestigious representations of humanity in the Imperium. This is a title so rarely given out and so infamous that the holder is seen as having a status on par with a living saint. So rarely do they grace the audience with their presence, some have even questioned their existence entirely. Their portraits stand for generations, their statues grace arenas for years, decades. It has even been said that in times, entire generations have come and passed between championship matches of this level. Yet the spectacle of Dominatus does not end there, or with the special effects and pyrotechnics used to wow the crowd at every show. But instead, there exists an entire other layer to this sport entirely. These are known as the triumphs. They are special events, bouts and engagements that even the audience openly understand are a show and are somewhat allowed to treat it as such, but are based on real historical battles that involve famous heroes and villains from across the galaxy. In truth, these triumphs are a propaganda-filled theatrical parody of real events and people, potentially distilling an entire campaign involving untold heroic acts, bloodshed and the deaths of billions down to a single easy understandable match. With all nuance and ambiguity removed, events and characters are stripped down to their bones and rewritten to depict an imperial victory and glory. Battles against those of chaos are reframed completely to omit any mention of the warp, gods, and almost anything that could suggest actual heresy. They are simply labelled as dissidents or disloyalists or other safer titles. This is, however, the only time whereby somebody playing a hostile character can be portrayed as larger or more intimidating than the faithful. This is because the Imperium is always the victor in the end, and the hero is seen as overcoming a greater threat. Some of the more notable exemplars of the triumphs include Troy Hardo, the Death World survivor who, if it breathes, he's suplexed it. Maximus Murenius, the ultimate warrior of the Astartes, who in reality is not actually an Astartes at all. Catherine Triumphant, who the events would take their name after, as well as Regalborn and the Archangel, the solar heroes who defeated the monster known as the Traitor Primus. All exemplars take their roles very seriously, yet this group take it to a new level, and do not distinguish between the acts they are portraying and the real events or real heroes they represent. But instead of seeking titles, honour and glory, these engagements are in some way seen as ritualised reenactments or representations of past or current events, and utterly holy in nature, with the latest event being the biggest Dominatus show of the decade, where glory is made eternal by his will, the Imperium Apexia, with the main event scheduled to be a triumph displaying Commissar Steel as he is set to battle against the Great Green One and take his revenge. It's set to be a classic and one that will go down in Dominatus history. Other events are held monthly and yearly, with regular shows being put on weekly and non-broadcast shows daily. Though the Ministorum claims that it's been an overall success as a project, others have disputed it. Despite the claimed effectiveness, the system of Dominatus is not without issues. Chief among these is the unpredictability of human emotion, something Imperium is trying to both entice, limit, and control. While the narratives presented are designed to guide audience response, they cannot fully control it. In certain cases, the attachment formed between audiences and specific performers has led to reactions that extend beyond the intended boundaries of the system. Storylines sometimes cut too deep, hit on hard truths, or overstep boundaries, but is not always without consequence from both ends of the spectrum. This has led to characters being pulled, never to be seen again, storylines to change, and even entire segmentum brands being put on lockdown under investigation. On the other hand, it has also at times led to public outcry and disapproval with events or narratives. Rises and falls in interest in investment, and with high and low points, but many of these issues span across multitudes of sports on Chariot and beyond, as times and talents fluctuate. Chariot's effectiveness as a world is both questioned and praised, with some believing the sport of Dominatus and the planet as a whole makes a mockery of what the Imperium is, giving the people too much liberty and allowing for vices that only lead to decadence and corruption, whilst others that is a valuable necessity to release public pressure, give nobles and those worthy a needed respite, and regulate the urges of the commoners of mankind, giving hard-fought soldiers some well-deserved respite from the darknesses of war, and a valuable tool to drive the imperial regime's agendas, motives, and drive public support for the imperial and the emperor's campaigns and regime interests. One notable event, however, will directly relate to the sport of Dominatus, and would in recent times trigger widespread unrest amongst the population of a neighbouring world within the Iyo sector. This would occur when the previous and well-loved intersegmentum imperialis Dominatus Grand Mantle was overthrown by an exemplar heel or false, known as the Penitent Ascended, winning by cheating when the adjudicar was injured with the aid of his giant bodyguard, known only as the Enforcer. giving the company a new intersegmentum imperialis dominatus grand mantle. In truth, this was done to hide a legitimate and potentially career-ending injury facing the previous grand mantle. But on Sarnath 12, what begun as disapproval soon turned into protests against the perceived injustice of the outcome. This quickly escalated into broader dissatisfaction with imperial governance. Riots would ensue, heavy enforcement crackdowns, deaths, rebellion, and before anyone knew it, the world was itself now in a full-scale open war, fighting an imperium that would see its cities starved out and its people eradicated and ever admit its own wrongdoing. The initial upset and spark of outrage long since forgotten, and the rebellion's meaning now a far cry from its origin. That is not to say that the event wasn't looked at, but overtly nothing was changed and the order was continued without reflection. The Grand Mantle remains. But these events, for those behind the scenes, serve as a reminder that while belief can be shaped, it cannot be entirely controlled. Try as they may. Today, Chariot exists as more than just a planetary anomaly, and had until recently served as a specific and invaluable role within the wider structure of the Imperium, with a seemingly and only growing influence and outreach. It is unknown how many worlds beyond the Cicatrix Maledictum's shadow still receive their broadcasts, and how many more receive news through random propaganda and other second-hand sources, but the planet continues to broadcast and its relentless push to entertain as always. By concentrating entertainment, spectacle, and controlled indulgence with a single location, it allows for the management of emotion and psychological pressures that might otherwise manifest as unrest or heresy elsewhere. At the same time, it generates significant economic and cultural influence, extending its reach far beyond its own system, through broadcast networks and those of other worlds, both near and far, plus banking more credit daily than most worlds could dream of in a year. It is a well-lubricated and fully operational machine of wealth generation. Billions of people now swarm its surface and fill its high spires. Nobles and aristocrats rack up credit and unfathomable debt to stay in luxury. Even more are trapped with no way back to their home sector since the warp's expansion, and the rise of the Cicatrix Maledictum. Now desperate and resorting to unimaginable lows to pay for their lifestyles, or simply out of luck completely, whilst criminals suck on the planet's hyper-violent underbelly and enforcers let powers go to their heads. Yet on Chariot, both are equally as needed as they are condemned. Every indulgence, every pleasure, every fantasy can be satisfied to some degree, with some saying that its deepest, darkest dens would make even the Drukhari proud. Others that its glitz and glamour show the true glory of the God Emperor and the power of his divinity. From racing circuits to gambling halls, servitor battles, dance halls, championship regicide tournaments, and every other sport under the Holy Emperor's gaze, under the authority of the Ordo Ludorum Bellatorum Emperantium, Chariot functions as both a release valve and a protection mechanism, shaping not only how many Imperial citizens feel, but how they understand their place within the wider Imperium itself. Nothing exemplifies this more than Dominatus. As a sport, it does not present reality as it is. It presents reality as it must be understood by the masses in the eyes of the Imperium and the Ministorum. Through its narratives, its performances, and its carefully controlled illusions, it reinforces a vision of the Imperium as unified, powerful, and inevitable. Within its arenas, heroes do not truly die. Wars are always resolved, and the authority of the Emperor is never meaningfully challenged. And for those who watch, that is enough. It is more than enough. For in the eyes of many, to not speak of what goes on in the ring and in the sport of Dominatus as an actual fact is in the 41st millennium heresy. Because on Chariot, as in much of the Imperium, it is not reality that matters most, but the story that replaces it. Yet beyond those lights, beyond the spectacle, beyond the tales the Imperium tells itself, the real war continues, in the bowels of Chariot itself, as much as it does in the galaxy above. And the story only gets darker from here. Well, that's it, guys. Long, I know, but if you stayed around for this one, thank you so much. It really does mean the world. I will admit, I haven't got any rules for Dominatus as an actual tabletop game, but perhaps one day I'll come up with some, or feel free to make it yourselves. I think it would be a fantastic game to play, like quick matches around a table with friends or family, even if they don't like 40k, just something to do with friends. And if fantasy can have American football, why can't 40k have wrestling? But I do hope you enjoyed it, as this has been a long build and something I've been working on for quite a while. The ring itself is made from a rumble slam ring, cut down to be like 8x8 squares, and to be honest it's still massive. But hey, I think it's cool, and it blends the two of my favourite themes together, that being 40k and wrestling. The flags are just card and matchsticks, then painted, with added transfers to give them some decoration, which I've got quite a few of now, so hopefully you'll see more of them in future videos. And to decorate the sides of the actual ring itself a bit more, I added eagle heads icons from the Knights kit, and some old rhino doors and tank doors and stuff, just to sort of make it look like you can get stuff from under the ring and stuff, really. And those side bits look like the wrestlers could like climb up the little ladder part and jump off and do some cool move or something. But then we come to the stairs, and they're model railway subway staircases. They're just turned upside down, and then I added some 3D candles and some like iconography to attach to it to give it that 40k vibe. Plus the transfers and stuff in the ring. That's just knight transfers for the big icons, and then I painted the ring white and then added the red square in it just to give it a bit more shape and that dynamic sporty look, if you know what I mean. But as I said at the beginning, these have all been kit bash minis from different ranges, mostly just head swaps, arm swaps, and then some hands and stuff from guard boxes, rattling boxes, blood bowl bits, anything that you can get a free hand from to make the Dominatus exemplars, punching fists. Some of them have got like brass knucks, that sort of stuff. The belts were simply made from green stuff and aren't great, I know, but they're okay, they'll do. It'd be cool to actually have sculpted ones, but that'll take ages. And the tag team ones are here. They were made from green stuff, and they had the Aquila cut in half. I think it was really cool. That was from the Space Marine Flyer kit, but I think the Aquila belt's probably the coolest out of the lot. But like I say, that's it guys. Thank you very much for watching. Thank you for all your support over the past year. It's been great. First year on YouTube doing this sort of stuff, and I wanted to do something special for the sort of anniversary of the channel. I hope you like it. If you did, please subscribe, as we're going to be looking into another Chaos Cult very shortly in an upcoming video. Thanks guys, bye.